As soon as a woman's sharp high heels clicked against the floor, the company's atmosphere turned tense. Employees in flat sandals hurriedly adjusted their appearances, those at the breakfast table tossed their food into the trash, and scattered magazines on desks were quickly tidied. She was Miranda, the white-haired, radiant figure who ran America's top fashion magazine, Runway. Fashion coursed through her veins, and working for her was like facing a storm every morning. Miranda tolerated no mistakes from her team, especially her chief assistant, Emily. Emily was burdened daily with a pile of complex, time-sensitive tasks, down to perfecting even a simple coffee to Miranda's exact taste. Yet Emily never complained, driven by her dream of shining in the front row at Paris Fashion Week alongside Miranda. When Miranda returned from a business trip, a new graduate named Andy stepped into the office for an interview. Dressed plainly, with a beautiful face but worlds away from fashion, she was there for the job of Miranda's second assistant. Emily's face fell at the sight of her. Miranda wouldn't dream of letting such an unpolished girl into her office, let alone as an assistant. Still, Emily had to follow protocol. She warned Andy that working for Miranda was no child's play. Last week alone, Miranda had fired 2 girls. Despite her strictness, many were desperate for the job, as a few months under Miranda could transform a resume into gold, opening doors to top roles at other magazines. Shockingly, Andy, a complete novice, was not only clueless about fashion, but didn't even know Miranda's name. Emily found this odd, but instead of arguing, rushed to get the interview over with so Andy would be out of her sight. Andy felt the job was likely out of her reach, but despite Miranda and Emily's cold stares, she wanted to try. She told Miranda she was ready for the tough role. Just then, a man named Nigel interrupted their conversation. Disheartened, Andy started to leave, certain she'd lost her chance. But as she reached the lobby, Emily called her back. Perhaps Miranda had been impressed by Andy's tenacity and decided to give her a shot. That night, over drinks with friends, Andy gleefully announced she'd landed the job at Runway. Her friends cheered, but also expressed concern. Anyone even slightly familiar with fashion knew Miranda was nicknamed the Devil. Still, Andy's confidence didn't waver. She didn't see herself as weak. But the next morning at 6 a.m., a call from Emily dampened her enthusiasm. Emily ordered her to immediately fetch 4 different flavors and temperatures of coffee. Andy scribbled notes and raced to the office, but Miranda had already arrived. She liked to start her day with hot coffee, and Andy's delay sparked mild irritation. Emily sternly warned Andy that another slip-up could cost them both their jobs. With Emily stepping out, she left Andy in charge of answering phones, instructing her not to move, not even for a bathroom break, until she returned. Designer Nigel handed Andy a pair of high heels, as flat shoes were forbidden in Miranda's presence. Then Miranda's sharp voice echoed. She never bothered learning new assistants' names as they changed so often, simply calling them all Emily. When Andy approached and clarified her name wasn't Emily, Miranda found it faintly amusing but brushed it off, ordering her to fetch dresses. When Andy asked what kind, Miranda scolded her for asking dull questions and piled on multiple tasks. Andy had to memorize every word Miranda said, with no room for clarification. As she turned to leave, Miranda stopped her, eyeing her from head to toe. Andy's loose blue sweater, plain skirt, black tights and heavy black shoes irked Miranda's refined taste. After a long stare, Miranda dismissed her. Outside, Andy quickly slipped into Nigel's heels. Luckily, Emily returned just then. Though she didn't like Andy, they were in the same boat. If Andy messed up, Emily would pay the price too. So, she tried to keep Andy on track. After starting the job, Andy's life turned upside down, but one thing improved: she was never late again. Each morning, as Miranda entered, she'd carelessly toss her coat and bag onto Andy's desk. When Andy seemed flustered, Emily told her to hang them up quickly. After morning tasks, lunchtime brought snide remarks about Andy eating too much. Then Miranda's call came, forcing Andy to abandon her meal and rush back to the office, where a clothing selection was underway. Andy stood in a corner, watching in surprise as Miranda agonized over 2 nearly identical belts. Unable to hold back, Andy laughed, drawing everyone's attention. Clueless about fashion, she couldn't grasp why such a small detail caused such a fuss, but for someone like Miranda, a tiny difference could be monumental. Seeing Andy's careless attitude, Miranda referenced her blue sweater, explaining that Andy might think fashion was irrelevant, casually picking a sweater from her closet. But that blue shade became a trend because a designer, Nigel, had created a hit collection years ago, copied by others and brought to the masses. When Andy bought that sweater for a few bucks, it was tied to a multi-billion-dollar industry. That was the effort behind the fashion world's stars. To Andy, unfamiliar with fashion, Miranda seemed like an enigma. Back home, she vented to her boyfriend, vowing never to become Miranda's flashy minion, strutting in glamorous clothes and heels. Yet her fighting spirit kept her going. If she could stick it out for a year, she might land an editor-in-chief role at another magazine. The next morning, Andy arrived refreshed and greeted Miranda enthusiastically. As usual, Miranda didn't glance her way, tossing her coat and bag onto Andy's desk. Andy's days were filled with small tasks, fetching coffee, running errands for Miranda, even walking her dog. Though hectic, Andy held her ground, outlasting girls who quit in days. Thankfully, weekends offered 2 days of relief. That weekend, her father visited. Over dinner at a restaurant, Andy, whose salary barely covered rent, had to borrow money from home. She thought her father wouldn't know, but her mother had let it slip. Thankfully, Andy's father wasn't angry and gave her some money, but he had complaints about her job. In his view, Andy should have finished her studies at Stanford. For now, though, Andy's focus was entirely on her work. Soon, Miranda and Emily were set to leave for Paris Fashion Week. Although Andy couldn't go, her status as Miranda's deputy was about to rise. Just then, a sharp phone ring interrupted the father-daughter conversation. It was Miranda. Bad weather had cancelled her flight, but she wanted to return for her twin daughter's performance. She ordered Andy to arrange a private jet. Andy immediately contacted an aviation company, but no flights were available. Despite her best efforts, Miranda missed her daughter's performance. Upon her return, Miranda summoned Andy to her office and explained why she'd hired her, but Andy had broken her trust. Whatever the case, other girls at least understood fashion, while Andy had nothing. Andy wanted to explain, but Miranda wasn't one for excuses. The job wasn't done. That was the reality. With tears in her eyes, Andy stepped out. A deep sense of despair overwhelmed her. She'd worked hard, even if no one praised her, but all Miranda saw were her flaws, scolding her in the harshest tone. Andy didn't know who to share her troubles with. Finally, she went to Nigel, who was somewhat kinder to her, whether he wanted to listen or not. Andy vented all her frustration, even letting slip words like witch for Miranda. Nigel simply said, "How terrifying." This job was countless girls' dream. If Andy quit, Miranda would replace her in a heartbeat, but Andy had no intention of giving up. She wanted to win Miranda's heart through hard work. When she showed this resolve, Nigel realized she was different from the others. She had a mountain-like determination, like a wildflower blooming through a storm, but Nigel spotted her weakness. Andy had taken the job to add a valuable experience to her resume, not out of true passion for fashion. Those who thrived here, like Nigel and Emily, had a genuine love for it. Andy was merely pushed by the workload. That was the difference. Nigel's words shook her. She realized that to earn Miranda's praise, she'd have to fully immerse herself in this world. Standing apart with a lofty attitude wouldn't cut it. Andy's sorrow vanished. Now she had to transform herself completely, and Nigel was there to help. Without excuses, he picked out clothes that suited her personality. The next day, when Andy stepped into the office, all eyes were on her. Her already beautiful face was enhanced by makeup, long, glossy black hair, a stylish black Prada suit, and blue boots. She looked like a fashion icon. Emily was stunned, having just told colleagues that Miranda would surely fire Andy. But this transformation was so striking that Andy's entire personality shone. She was like a wildflower, blooming confidently through a storm. There was a new calm and poise in her that wasn't there before. Even her boyfriend was amazed and thrilled by her new look. From that day, Andy's outfits were unique and always cutting edge. Her work became far easier, and Miranda began to notice her. Andy's quiet confidence grew stronger. Fashion wasn't just about clothes. It was about personality. Whenever she met friends, she brought them stylish gifts. They started to feel she wasn't the same Andy anymore. But one thing remained: she answered Miranda's calls with utmost urgency, diving into tasks immediately. She was at Miranda's beck and call 24/7, but now she didn't complain. Miranda began entrusting her with bigger tasks, even surpassing Emily. Andy anticipated Miranda's needs before they were voiced. Miranda was so pleased with her work that her demeanor softened. She even allowed Andy to deliver items to her home, a privilege only Emily had held, showing Miranda's trust. Before going, Emily gave Andy strict instructions. Don't look around, don't talk to anyone, just do the job quietly. But inside, Andy couldn't find a place to set the items down. In her nervousness, she glanced around, and Miranda's twin daughters called her upstairs. Unintentionally, she overheard a heated argument between Miranda and her husband. Realizing she shouldn't be there, Andy quietly headed downstairs, but the faint sound of her steps caught the couple's attention. Miranda, always strong in public, was furious that her private argument was exposed to an outsider. She glared at Andy. Caught in a dilemma, Andy silently placed the magazine on the stairs and left. She didn't realize how big a mistake she'd made. The next day, Emily pulled her aside as soon as she reached the office. Andy explained that the twins had called her, but Emily clutched her head in frustration. She stressed that if Andy lost her job now, her Paris Fashion Week dream would shatter and both their careers would be at stake. Andy finally grasped her error. Then Miranda's terrifying voice echoed through the office. Andy approached her nervously, expecting a tirade, but Miranda didn't mention the previous day. Instead, she gave her an impossible task: get the unpublished Harry Potter manuscript. Andy realized Miranda was deliberately trying to make her quit, yet accustomed to following Miranda's orders no matter how impossible, Andy took it on. Then Miranda added another task: bring a steak in 15 minutes. It wasn't too difficult, just tight on time. Andy rushed out, got a steak from a top restaurant, and kept calling publishers. She remembered an editor she'd once met. As a last hope, she called him. The request was tough even for him, and Andy had to hang up. She got the steak to Miranda's desk in 15 minutes, but Miranda said she was dining out with a friend. As she left, she warned that if the manuscript wasn't on her desk by 3 p.m., Andy needn't return. Furious, Andy threw the steak in the sink. She was certain she couldn't complete this task. Leaving the office, she called her boyfriend, saying she was quitting. He was thrilled, thinking she'd finally be free of the burden, but as soon as she hung up, the editor called back. He'd actually secured the Harry Potter manuscript. Andy couldn't believe her ears. She thought this wall would crush her, but it crumbled so easily. Life sometimes brings unexpected turns. She rushed to meet the editor and got the manuscript to Miranda's desk before 3 p.m. Still, Miranda tried to needle her with a cosplay task, but Andy had become a sharp, adept employee, wise to Miranda's tactics. The book reached Miranda's daughters, and even Miranda, always quick to find faults, couldn't spot a single flaw. Andy had scored a brilliant victory, and in Miranda's eyes, her importance now surpassed even Emily's. When Andy returned home, her boyfriend had bought heaps of food to celebrate her resignation. But Andy explained that she'd worked under Miranda for months, and quitting now would be foolish. Boyfriend couldn't understand her attitude. The pay wasn't great. She had to be uncool constantly, and her boss was the devil. Still, Andy was determined to stay. Somewhere along the way, Andy was no longer the plain, innocent girl. In just a few months, she had transformed completely. The good thing was that her relationship hadn't yet broken, but Andy was starting to realize her entire focus was on work, and she felt like she was losing herself. Nigel was right. Miranda was now giving Andy more attention. At this critical moment, Emily fell ill with a terrible cold. Despite her condition, she kept coming to work. Paris Fashion Week was approaching, and she had to keep everything perfect. But in her state, Miranda found her presence bothersome, sanitizing everything Emily touched. That day was Andy's boyfriend's birthday. She wanted to leave work early, but as she stepped out of the building, Miranda called. She told Andy to accompany her to a high-profile gala, an event typically reserved for the primary assistant. Miranda said everything had to be perfect, and since her primary assistant was now a a virus, Andy had to come. Emily handed Andy a guest list, instructing her to memorize everyone's names and identities in an hour. It was Andy's first high-profile gala. She wore a black gown, her long hair tied back, looking elegant and striking, no less than Emily. As Miranda met people, Emily was supposed to whisper their names and details beforehand, but at one point, Emily's mind froze and she forgot a guest's name. Fortunately, Andy's sharp memory saved the day, quickly providing Miranda with the name and details, averting a small crisis. Andy's performance was flawless and polished. Emily was fuming, but Andy was anxious, needing to get to her boyfriend's birthday. As the gala ended, she rushed out like the wind. On the way, she ran into the editor who had helped with the manuscript. Grateful, she stopped to chat briefly. When she finally reached home, her boyfriend was sitting alone on the couch, furious at her absence. No matter what Andy said, he didn't want to hear it, assuming her excuse would be work again. Frustration was slowly building between them, and if it continued, their relationship might break. Andy went to Miranda's house again to deliver a book. And Miranda dropped stunning news. She'd chosen Andy, not Emily, for Paris Fashion Week. But instead of joy, Andy's face clouded with sadness. She knew how much Emily had sacrificed for this opportunity, sticking to a strict diet to maintain her figure and coming to work despite being sick. This news wasn't a cause for celebration for Andy. It was a crushing blow for Emily. Andy wanted to refuse, but Miranda's decision was final. Miranda warned her sternly that refusing would not only end her career at Runway, but ensure no other magazine would hire her. Andy had no choice. Leaving Miranda's house, her heart felt heavy. She couldn't understand why she was so committed to this path. The next day at the office, Miranda ordered Andy to break the news to Emily herself. Emily was back to her frantic pace, like a spinning wheel. Andy didn't want her to hear it over the phone, but as soon as the phone rang, Emily picked it up instantly. Andy could sense the panic in her voice. Before she could speak, a speeding car hit Emily, her colorful scarf and clothes fluttering in the air. In the hospital, Andy finally told Emily the news. Emily's anger hit the roof. When Andy first arrived, Emily had dismissed her, thinking she'd be gone in days. But Andy had stayed. Still, Emily never imagined Andy would take her place. Andy's dream had always been to gain runway experience and become a journalist at a newspaper. But since donning those stylish boots, her entire personality had changed. She was no longer the girl far removed from fashion, always pushing forward. She was like a rose spreading its fragrance in any season, even outshining Emily. Emily was utterly broken, lashing out by devouring food as if making up for days of hunger. She met the editor again, and as they parted, he kissed her cheek. A friend saw this and was baffled. Andy chased after her, exclaiming it was just a work contact, but her friend didn't care. She bluntly said Andy had changed long ago. This sentiment had been simmering among their friends, and now her friend had voiced it. Andy's heart sank with sorrow. Then her boyfriend approached. Andy unleashed all her frustration on him. Furious, she stormed out and he followed. Andy said she was trapped. Since joining Runway, everything had to bend to Miranda's will, from her wardrobe to her personality. Her boyfriend poured out his pain, saying she was no longer the simple, uncompetitive girl she used to be. All she cared about now was Miranda and flashy clothes. She wasn't the same Andy. Andy knew their relationship was so damaged that breaking up was the only option. Her boyfriend had been waiting for this day. When she mentioned a breakup, he stayed silent, quietly turning and disappearing into the night. Then Miranda's phone rang again. Despite her pain, Andy answered it instantly as always, a habit forged by working under Miranda. As long as she was at Runway, that habit wouldn't change. Finally, Andy boarded a flight to Paris with Miranda, a memory she'd never forget. Even there, Miranda was the center of attention, and Andy, standing beside her, drew eyes too. But back at the hotel, Andy saw a different side of Miranda. Dressed in a grey silk robe, exhausted and slumped on the couch, she lacked her usual spark. It turned out she was on the path to divorce from her husband. Miranda was upset about her divorce, but she was more concerned about how the media would sensationalize the news. It wasn't her first divorce. She knew what the headlines would say. Despite her obsession with her reputation, as a mother, she only wanted to shield her daughters from the world's noise. In truth, no matter the country, women's pain is universal. Regardless of how stellar their careers are, people fixate on their love stories and marriages. If their marriage fails, their entire life is deemed a failure. Andy wanted to do something for her, but all Miranda needed was for her to do her job. Miranda was so strong she didn't need external support. As Andy applied makeup in front of the mirror, she remembered the girl from months ago, always lost in thought. It felt like a different life. Perhaps Emily was right. Another soul now lived in her body. How else could Andy's ordinary dresses earn Nigel's praise? Later, Andy dined with the editor she'd met at Fashion Week. She inadvertently mentioned her breakup with her boyfriend. A wave of joy surged through the editor, who had liked Andy at first sight. Why else would he have gone to such length to secure the Harry Potter manuscript? After dinner, they strolled Paris's streets, kissing. It was Paris, a witness to one love story after another. The next morning, Andy woke up and saw a magazine in the editor's bag. It meant Miranda was being replaced. No matter how capable she was, to the capitalists, she was just a replaceable object. Andy couldn't imagine how this news would shatter Miranda. She had given her life to Runway, and now just because Jacqueline was cheaper, the powers that be ruthlessly ousted her. Andy found it deeply unfair. Furious, she stormed out, ending her brief fling with the editor. She called Miranda to share the news, but at the mention of Jacqueline's name, Miranda hung up. Andy had to go to the hotel and knock on Miranda's door. A man opened it. Clearly, Miranda hadn't spent the night alone either. Disappointed, Andy left. Before entering the meeting hall, Andy finally told Miranda, but Miranda paid it no mind, exuding her usual confidence and sharpness. Contrary to Andy's expectations, Miranda reclaimed her position as Runway's editor-in-chief. Her confidence wasn't baseless. She had a strategy planned. Miranda never gave up. Jacqueline had offered her a supervisor role meant for Nigel, thinking her move was foolproof. Before the meeting, Nigel had even opened a bottle of champagne with Andy to celebrate, but his hopes were dashed. On the way back, Andy felt heavy-hearted, terrible for Nigel. Miranda, who always ignored others' feelings, spoke directly to Andy for the first time, saying no. She had threatened the company's owner that if she left Runway, she'd take her entire top team with her. She even had a list prepared. The owner had no choice but to keep her as editor-in-chief. For Jacqueline, he settled the matter by giving her the supervisor role. Thus, Nigel became a casualty of Miranda's power play. Though Miranda promised him compensation later, Nigel knew it was meaningless. This was the bitter truth of the corporate world. When things go well, colleagues feel like friends, even close ones. But when interests clash, even the strongest bonds crumble. Miranda's maneuvers showed Andy the true face of human nature. Before stepping out of the car, Miranda put on her signature sunglasses, her iconic smile returning. Media reporters swarmed her. She was once again the center of the world. But Andy no longer wanted to follow in her footsteps. She looked at Miranda one last time and walked in the opposite direction. At a fountain, her phone rang again. The caller's name was the same familiar one, but this time Andy tossed the phone into the fountain. She had said her final goodbye to Miranda. Andy returned to wearing simple clothes and made plans to meet her boyfriend at a restaurant. In that moment, she realized her true desires. A simple life, a handful of friends, and her boyfriend's boundless love. These were what she wanted. Perhaps only after loss do we value the small moments closest to the heart. Andy went to interview for a journalist job with her resume. She feared Miranda might badmouth her in the industry. But, surprisingly, Miranda sent a fax to the interviewer stating Andy was reliable and capable, adding that not hiring her would be a huge loss. Miranda was far kinder than Andy had thought, hiding her soft heart behind a tough exterior in this tangled world. One day, while walking, Andy unexpectedly ran into Miranda. She was the same, White hair, fashionable clothes, and a sharp demeanor that shone in a crowd. Their eyes met. Andy smiled and waved. Miranda's face was expressionless, but as she got into her car, she gave Andy a look of approval. By then, Andy had shed all her glamorous clothes, back to the cheap ones Miranda called ordinary. Yet no one could deny her beauty. She now radiated confidence inside and out, like a rose that never loses its fragrance, even in storms. In this complex, tangled world, two women with different desires and experiences had found their paths. They knew what kind of life they wanted, and they would always move forward, listening to their hearts cool. This story is inspired by a 2006 film featuring brilliant performances by Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep. In real life, both are incredibly talented and strong women. The film is about Andy's growth and awakening, depicting the clash between idealism and reality. On this journey, Andy rediscovered and rebuilt her self-worth, teaching every girl that a true queen needs no crown.